Longevity Junky is presented to you by our friends at Acast. Hey, Longevity Junkie, it's time to get your fix. I'm Nikki Lee, the OG Longevity Junkie.
And I'm Buck Joffrey, the health-conscious hedonist.
And coming up, we talk about the right way to fast and its benefits with Dr. Valter Longo. And we have a new segment called Reddit on Reddit. But first, of course, Buck, let's catch up. How have you been?
I have a cold. I have a stupid cold, I'll tell you. And I was thinking about this because since, we do have a health-related show here, colds are actually caused by two main viruses. One of them is called a rhinovirus, and the other one, believe it or not, is a coronavirus.
Oh, really?
So the issue is that, like, when we think of coronavirus, like, it's kind of a family of viruses, right? So you can have a dog, which is like the common cold, or you could have like a crazy, vicious wolf, which is like the COVID-19. But
you're hilarious, Buck. Like, where do you come up with this shit sometimes?
I'm not traveling as much as you, so I'm swimming around in my head instead. So
I know you're hilarious, but I guess if I ever need some help, like having creative visions, I know who to go to.
Oh yeah, for sure. So
when I was in Kenya, I went to a bunch of schools, and there was this one all-girls school where there was a list by the principal of girls who were literally getting kicked out of school because they couldn't afford it. And I don't even think it's, a crazy amount of money, but to like, the way they live and the way we live in terms of economic status is way different. And this one girl had no father figure. Her biological father, and then her stepfather have also passed away. And so her mom is a single mom, and she also has brothers and sisters and can't afford her to finish high school. She's in the middle of high school. And so I met her, but I wanted her take on it. And she was like, well, it's important because I want to be a doctor. And I was like, oh my God, I love this because already health is my passions. And I was like, okay, amazing. Or she's like, and I know I can be one because a lot of people in her family have said they want to be doctors, but she was like, I know I can do it. And I was like, here's my girl talking affirmatively about her life and having the right verbiage that we all have to work on, me included for sure. And I was like, you know what? And I told her, and I told the principal and everyone, I was like, I would love to sponsor you to make sure that you finish out high school so that you can do this dream. So I just paid off for this year's tuition, and then we'll have next year and everything for her food because they go away and live there for like basically the whole year until maybe a couple months out of the year they're back home. But so I just finished off paying for her school and her uniform and her food and just for her living, and so that she can finish out high school.
That was very nice of you.
Yeah.
Like, we take a lot for granted in this country.
Yeah.
In general, as a child of immigrants myself, especially in the underdeveloped countries like that. Like my dad grew up poor in India, which is poor. And he also ended up being one of these kids who was just completely self-motivated, and, they had to pay for high school. It wasn't free. So he actually tutored the rich kids, paid for his own tuition, and ultimately was like kind of supporting his own family as a teenager. And that obviously makes it's a hugely different perspective than, for example, I did. I mean, he comes to this country, and before you know it, he's living the American dream. And then I've become just another upper middle class kid who takes everything for granted. It's a pretty interesting paradigm shift, but good for you. I think that's great.
Yeah, I know. It makes me feel good.
Yeah, for sure. So what do we got going on here today?
Oh my God. Okay. I'm actually super, super excited about this because I think it's going to be so much fun to do. We're going to take unusual Reddit stories about health and longevity, of course. And we're going to go through the readings and reactions. And because we have our own Dr. Buck here, we are also able to, add our own scientific spin to these outrageous and awkward situations. So I'm very excited to introduce to you Reddit on Reddit. I can't even. The title, Am I the asshole for refusing to donate my kidney? I never thought I'd find myself posting here, but the situation I'm in is so bizarre that I need some outside perspective. So, a bit of background. I, a 29 male, have a 55-year-old stepmother who I've never really had a close relationship with. We've always kept things civil, but that's about it. Her son, my stepbrother, 15, is practically a stranger to me. We've never really bonded and our interactions are minimal at best. My stepmother recently approached me with an outrageous request. She asked me to donate my kidney to her son. Yes, you read that right. My kidney for a kid I barely know. He lives with his father and has a congenital disease that requires a transplant in the short term. Naturally, I was taken aback and asked why on earth she thought I would agree to such a thing. Her reasoning? Apparently, she believes that because we're now part of the same family, I should be willing to make this sacrifice for her son. To make the situation even more surreal, my stepmother made an odd comment about the longevity and health of my side of the family. She literally said that we have great quality organs. I tried explaining that we don't have any kind of close relationship and that donating a kidney is a major decision with serious consequences, but she wouldn't hear it. According to her, I'm being selfish and heartless for not saving her boy's life. I know that she is suffering in distress, but here's the kicker. When I suggested that she could potentially donate the kidney herself, she refused, citing religious reasons and said that because I'm agnostic, I shouldn't have that problem. So not only is she expecting me to make this life-altering sacrifice for her son, but she won't consider doing it herself due to her beliefs. Probably all this arises because we recently found out that we have the same blood type, making me a compatible donor. Also, a couple of years ago, I may have made a sweeping statement that I would do anything for my family regardless of how good or bad our relationship was. And that's the end of that.
Wow.
I know.
That's a crazy story, right? I mean, well, let's start with this. Okay, just as a reminder, what do the kidneys do?
Right.
They filter waste and fluid. They regulate electrolytes. They help maintain blood pressure. They're, significantly involved with some crucial hormones that impact red blood cell production and health. And one thing not to take lightly is that evolutionarily, we have two kidneys, right? And that's probably as a safety net because these functions are so vital to survival that losing one kidney means we're essentially giving up that built-in backup, which, it's kind of a serious decision with lifelong consequences, right?
I feel like anything, like giving any organ in your body to anybody is probably a very intense decision. I mean, well, let me ask you, is everything equal? Like, do you think you have two kidneys, do they work at the same time? Is it equally distributed? Is that how it kind of goes? Or is I don't know, is one kind of working more in some situations? Does it matter? Because I know there are people only with one kidney.
Yeah. So it's a good question, actually. So generally what happens is that the remaining kidney obviously has to sort of take over the load, and that can increase the risk of high blood pressure,
your body has to work extra hard.
Yeah, protein leakage in the urine. You can have reduced kidney function over time, which a lot of people do as they get older anyway. And if you later develop something like diabetes or high blood pressure, that one remaining kidney is even more vulnerable to disease and potential failure. So I mean, can you live with one kidney? Yes, you can, but I think this is kind of a big deal. Not to mention, there are some surgical risks here and the major surgery with real risks involved. You really have to alter your lifestyle.
You have to be way more cautious, in my opinion. Like, you have to be way more cautious of the life decisions that you make, even down to just diet or drinking a lot or whatever you're going to do. So I just feel like you have to make way more healthier choices. And if you're not that type of person, then
blood type compatibility is just really one part of that assessment for kidney donation as well. And so this guy might not qualify. He's still got to do tissue typing, antibody screening, cross matching. If I were him,
real?
Yeah, if I were him and I wanted to avoid conflict, I'd just go into the doctor and say, hey, I don't really want to do this. Can you just say I'm not of course that's me. Like, trying not to create a family
problem. Can you do
problem.
that? Can you just go in and say, like, please just put on there that I'm not a match so I can get out of this? Will they do that for you?
I mean, I would. As a doctor, I would do it. I would just be like, not
you
a
would
match.
do it for that person.
Well, I mean, if you think about it too, right? Like the person has to, they have to be okayed as a donor. And part of that is the psychological assessment as well. And, you can, for any reason, say, this is not a compatible donor. So, I mean, listen, you could have that conflict, which is fine too. I was just saying, like, if it were me and I was trying to sneak out of something without creating it, that might be the way I would do it, Well,
I think that's very smart though, but I also don't think people would have thought of that. So I love that you're saying that out loud because now people are like, oh my God, I can literally just, go to the doctor, say I did it just to get this person off my back. Well, and I think it's so crazy that the mom wouldn't even do it.
That religious thing is BS. It's complete BS, right? I mean, the stepmothers refuse to donate and because and then says the other guy should because he doesn't have a religion. So that's basically like, well, you're going to go to hell anyway. And right?
That's so sad. Yes.
This is insane.
That is super, super insane. I mean, yeah. And then I just like how she's like, well, we're family now. Like, we're family now. Now you have to do this. It's like,
yeah.
Sounds like an evil stepmother from like.
Evil stepmother. Yes.
It does feel that way.
So I think in conclusion, what we're going to say is that we don't think you need to do this. And I think if you want to try to, if you want to try to save that relationship or make it less stressful, maybe go to the doctor and pretend you're going through the steps and let them know that you're really you're getting coerced into this. And can you just, give me a medical no one way or another, and it could be psychological too. So
I don't know, when evil stepmothers, they go around and, it's a whole thing. There's Disney stories about these things.
All right. Well, I think we've given our take on that, and we're
good luck with that out there.
We're united on this front.
All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be talking to Dr. Valter Longo. Welcome back to Longevity Junky. Time for our guest interview. It's the breakdown with Dr. Valter Longo. Dr. Valter Longo is professor of gerontology and biological sciences and director of the Longevity Institute at the University of Southern California, one of the leading centers for research on aging and age-related diseases. He's the author of the upcoming book, Fasting Cancer, How Fasting and Nutritechnology Are Creating a Revolution in Cancer Prevention and Treatment. He's also behind the Prolong Nutrition Program, a fasting mimetic diet, which provides benefits of weight loss, healthy aging, and metabolic health. Welcome to the show.
Thanks.
Hey, Walter. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good.
So you wrote a book called The Longevity Diet. What are the principles of this diet? Because I feel like I have to know.
Yeah, so that book, I try to put 30 years of research in lots of different systems and, all the way from simple organisms to humans and centenarians, and put it together. And then I think you can get three major things out of it. One is pescatarian diet, at least until age 65. So fish plus vegan, seems to be ideal. Without going into too much details, but we can if you want. So pescatarian up to age 65. After 65, 70, we think Mediterranean diet starts becoming, again, not a good choice, or the Mediterranean diet equivalent. Different countries, of course, eat differently. Not everybody, it's not really about Mediterranean diet, it's about the ingredient. And I think, the Okinawan ones have as good of a diet, or the Japanese have as good of a diet. It's just different, right? And the Koreans now are doing very, very well in longevity-wise. So that's one. And two is time-restricted eating, but I think only 12 hours, right? So 8 a.m. and to 8 p.m., let's say. A lot of people do 16 hours. I'm against it. We can talk about that if you want. 12 hours, less effective, but much safer. And for those reasons, I go with 12 hours time-restricted eating. And then the third one is the fasting mimicking diet. And, and we see fasting mimicking diet is a vegan medicine, right? Something that comes in a box. I cannot advertise. I cannot talk about product names. You did, but I didn't. 3 or 4 times a year of this fasting mimicking diet for the average person. Now, diabetics, we can talk about it if you want. We tested it on 6 times in 6 months or 12 times in 12 months for the diabetes patients. So, different uses. And now for cancer, it's also about once a month, sometimes even once every 3 weeks. A lot of this cancer for diabetes is more conclusive. Cancer is still early phases, but the FMD is starting to show some very positive results, and now it's also tested for autoimmunities, Alzheimer's disease, cardiovascular disease, etc.
We're going to get into all of those aspects, a lot of those things that you talked about. One of the things that you specifically talked about in terms of the diet is a pesco-vegetarian, basically fish and vegetables until you're about 65. And the implication there is ultimately low protein, right? And this is something I really want to get out, get your thoughts on, because there, as you know, you and I have had conversations about this before. There's a pretty big controversy right now between, people who talk about very heavy protein and those who are in your camp. I think it would be like you and say maybe David Sinclair, some of the more basic scientists who say that these high protein diets are actually very much sort of anti longevity. So can you give us your perspective on that? And presumably that's what you were talking about when you're talking about the change at 65.
One thing that I think distinguishes what we do in the longevity diet book is that mine is based on 5 pillars, right? So epidemiological data, clinical data, basic research, centenarian studies, and studies of complex systems, like others a plane or a car age. And so if you put it all together and you do it in a very careful way, meaning hundreds of papers, and you take the common denominator, you get that you cannot be malnourished, but you want to have just enough proteins to get the muscle, bones, et cetera, being at the right level, right? So avoid malnourishment by have about 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight of proteins, or 0.37 per pound of body weight. Now, right. This has to be of relatively high quality, right? So if your diet is all legumes, you're gonna have a problem, right? And that's why we always say the devil is in the details, and you gotta know what you're doing. We shouldn't even talk about proteins, right? It's irrelevant. How much protein you eat is irrelevant, because legumes. Some of the amino acids in legumes are 5 to 10 times lower than in another plant-based source, right? Even between 2 plant-based sources, you can have a 5-10-fold difference in amino acid level. And some of these amino acids are central, like say methionine, are central to drive the growth factor that then accelerate the aging process, right? So you see, it's starting to get complicated. But my point is not to confuse people, is to say it's just really, people that talk about protein, one thing is to talk about protein, one thing is to do a lot of research and put it all together, and you get very, very consistent in the same answer. Is too much protein is going to increase growth factors, is going to accelerate this pro-aging mode. Short term, you're going to get benefits, and long term, you're going to die earlier. And this may be at the center, by the way, of this earlier colorectal cancer. People are dying, breast cancer, colorectal cancer. Some of the cancer, we're starting to see deaths much earlier. You're starting to see the 25-year-olds getting some of these cancers, right?
That 65 years of age, presumably you're thinking more about the problems with muscle wasting, which we call sarcopenia, some of those things that you're trying to fight against at that age. Is that accurate?
Yeah, right. So after 65 or 70, it should be 65, 70 biological age. It shouldn't be chronological age. So you could be 65 and really biologically be 47, right? And then it doesn't apply to you. But let's say 65 biological age, these growth factors like IGF-1 and others go down dramatically. And so that's probably why if you increase the protein level, or certainly the amino acid level, that's just going to help you and not hurt you. That's what it seems like, even from the epidemiological data. And so then after 65, 70, gradually start increasing, and also increase the variety of food, right? So when we took mice that were young and we put them on a very, very low protein diet, nothing happened to them after 30 days. When we put old mice on a very low protein diet, within days, they lost a lot of weight, right? So the ability of an old organism to handle restrictive diets is much different from that of a young organism.
There's so many various periods of time where we go without food, and people are claiming, a 12-hour window is better, a 16-hour windows. There's so many differences out there. Can you start by actually giving us the difference between intermittent fasting and then prolonged fasting?
Yeah, so intermittent fasting usually refers to something you do every day, every other day, or maybe at least once or twice a week, right? And those, I think the only one that I believe is reasonable and feasible for people is the time restricted eating, right? Because the rest of it, even fasting for 1 day a week or twice a week, that's pretty rough on most people. And not even talking about alternate day fasting, which is nearly impossible for 99% of people. But if we're talking about the majority of people, something that everyone could do, I would say that time restricted eating is the one. Right now, time restricted eating can go, so how long you eat for every day, right? So you eat for 12 hours, you eat for 15 hours, or you eat for 8 hours. And then there's a lot of data out there talking about what if you just eat for 8 hours? And most people that do that, they skip breakfast, right? So they eat for only 8 hours. So let's say they start at 11 and they end at 7, right? Or 12 and 8. And the problem with that is that their breakfast skipping is being regularly associated with lots of problems. One of them being increased mortality, increased cardiovascular disease, increased hunger, and decreased energy expenditure, right? Both in clinical studies and epidemiological studies, right? So if you skip breakfast, you got a problem. And now there is some new groups that are saying it doesn't matter if you skip breakfast or you skip dinner, you still got the problem. Now, we don't know yet. People are saying maybe that data is not as good, certainly not as solid as the breakfast skipping, but now we're starting to see the same claims being made about dinner skipping. And so maybe there's just something that is not so beneficial about the 16 hours. The breakfast skippers are...
Which I did this morning, so now you're making me feel bad.
Yeah, are more likely to die for any cause, and particularly cardiovascular disease. And now the breakfast skippers are also, clinical trials indicate that they are more hungry and they have a reduced energy expenditure, right? So, and this is a clinical trial actually, where the people start eating at 8 versus at 12. And those that start eating at 12, had a slower metabolism essentially, and they were more hungry, even though they ate exactly the same food.
Okay. 12-hour window, you're saying to eat. Is it matter on portion sizes and things like that, or just you're able to eat for 12 hours and that's okay?
We try not to over-regulate people's lives, right? So I think if they can do 12 hours, that's already a big victory. And then, of course, if you can do your 3 meals plus a snack, that seems to be, acceptable by most physicians that I've spoken to. And the data will suggest that's probably the best way to go. There's some data suggesting that if you skip meals, that takes some years away. And it's not clear why. Again, it could be bad habits, right? They could not be the meal skipping, but it could be the bad habits. But so I think the idea would be 12 hours and 3 meals plus a snack.
So first of all, one of the things that we're talking about is that when we define intermittent fasting, that's really sort of a time-restricted feeding thing, whether that's you're eating for an 8-hour window or 12-hour window, et cetera. What you're saying is interesting to me because, as you know, right now, I've discussed this many times, there are a lot of people who are advocating for the 8-hour or shorter window for eating. And what your take on that is, yes, you may get some short-term metabolic benefits, which we heard, Dr. Robert Lufkin talk about recently, improving metabolic syndrome and all that kind of stuff. But the counter to that is you're saying there's data specifically in breakfast skippers that is showing that long-term, there may be a problem in the sense that you may be working against longevity if you continue to do this for a longer period of time. So potentially you could look at this as an 8-hour window as a short-term intervention to try to get metabolic health, but it may not be something that you would want to do, for the next 30 years. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly right. Right. And so I think that you want to optimize, and that's why you go to 12 hours, because, it may take you longer to get there, but then there's no data. And keep in mind the breakfast keeping data, there's meta-analysis on it now. This is not one study or two. This is tens of studies, very consistent in the United States and in other countries. The breakfast keepers consistently do much more poorly than everybody else.
Well, one of the thoughts that comes to mind then for me, Valter, is if you do an 8-hour window or shorter, but you actually eat breakfast, do you think that you would get the same negative outcome that you do from skipping breakfast?
Yeah, this new study that was presented at the American Heart Association, I don't know if it's published yet, they indicated it didn't matter when you did the 16 hours. It was still negative.
Right.
That's what they present. At least I think it was on cardiovascular risk. So we'll see when that is published. But so I wouldn't be surprised if some of the negatives, and certainly I wouldn't take a chance, right? So I would say, you can still do it with the 12 hours. It take you longer. That's okay. It may not be a bad idea to take a little bit longer to get there, and then do the fasting mimicking diet, let's say 3 times a year, versus, get into this risk zone. And I mean, I could never do 16 hours, right?
Now, what are the benefits potentially for prolonged fasting?
Yeah, I call it the fasting mimicking diet. I founded the company a long time ago, but I'm speaking as a professor. I cannot talk about products. But yeah, so the fasting mimicking diet, and that's been clinically tested, has got a lot of benefits that have been shown by these clinical trials. The first one we published in 2017, and it showed improvement in lots of markers and risk factors, ranging from inflammatory markers like C-reactive protein, cholesterol, blood pressure, IGF-1, which is a marker for aging and potentially cancer, and especially in people that started with high levels of these factors at baseline, right?
The idea, though, is it's supposed to mimic 5 days without food. It essentially is fooling your body into thinking you're not eating, correct? Can you talk a little bit about how that works?
Yeah, so it was designed, we first started many years ago with cancer patients and water-only fasting, and we did a trial at USC Norris Cancer Center where we were testing water-only and chemotherapy. And it turned out to be very difficult for patients. And so after that, we went to the government, and the government sponsored fasting mimicking diet research that we did. And essentially, we wanted to measure the effects of water-only fasting on 4 markers: IGF-1, IGF-PP1, ketone bodies, and glucose. And so that's what we did with the fasting mimicking diet. So it's basically utilizing our understanding of the connection between ingredients and pathways in cells and the whole organism, so circulating factors. So it's utilizing that understanding to then trick the system into responding as if it was fasting, water-only fasting. So, for example, fat is in most cases not registered by cells as a marker of abundance of food, right? And that's why we use high fat. The fasting mimicking diet is a high fat, low protein, low sugar. So the sugars and the proteins signal we have the energy and we have the building block to get back to our pro-reproductive, pro-growth mode.
I think when people started talking about intermittent fasting, specifically when they talk about various windows, 8 hours or less, where they thought they were achieving a number of the benefits that you get from a longer fast or a fasting mimetic diet. Can you talk about some of the physiologic changes that occur? Because I know you and I talked a little bit about this, but some of them don't occur until, day 3. And I feel like that's really important to understand the difference between, just doing a 12 or 11 hour fast every day versus doing these longer periods. Physiologically, how are they different?
The really powerful effect you get from from the system shrinking, at least, partially shrinking, and the organs shrinking, and in that process undergoing a cleanup. Autophagy is part of it, but it's not just autophagy. And then the bigger part is the re-expansion, right? So, and the re-expansion basically happens when the food comes back with high protein, high amino acids. And so that's when in mice and rats we see, of course, we think the same is happening in humans, but you cannot demonstrate this in humans. But in mice and rats, we see that stem cells get activated and we see that cells get reprogrammed, right? This reprogramming, the turning on of what's called Yamanaka factors. And so these are pluripotent stem cell factors. And when you fast for just a few hours, let's say 12 hours, none of this happens. So when you go 3, 4, 5 days, now you start seeing evidence of stem cell activation, progenitor cell activation, and also multi-system reprogramming.
So you're seeing an expression of Yamanaka factors there? We talked about this in our very first show, Nikki. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, no, I do.
A really exciting sort of research around reversal of epigenetic age. So you're saying, Dr. Longo, that actually seeing the body sort of naturally produce those, so that may be part of the longevity benefit here, right?
Definitely, right. So and it does in different ways. So in some cells is the Yamanaka factor. It may be one Yamanaka factor or two Yamanaka factor. In another cell type is another Yamanaka factor, and there are 4. And in another cell type, it's not Yamanaka factors at all. Is let's say in the blood, in the mice we see hematopoietic stem cells. Long-term is called LTHSCs, long-term hematopoietic stem cells. They're increased in numbers, right? So it just looks like the body has all kinds of ways, intracellularly and cellularly, to begin this process of regeneration. And so different organs pick a different track to get there. But the point is re-establish the, a normal size of cells and organs so that the individual can be back into a functional state, and hopefully a more functional state. Now, we published just a few months ago that after 3 cycles of the fasting mimicking diet, the biological age was reduced about 2.5 years.
How many days does that take? Because the diet's 5 days, but in order to get some of those benefits of, the stem cells producing, the Yamanaka factors coming up, progenitors, it's not happening day 1, obviously.
By day 4, the autophagy genes were still not active, right? By the end of day 5, now you see activation of the autophagy genes, right? So I think that probably 5 days is the minimum to getting to enough of an atrophy. So, for example, in people, I think usually in the 5 to 7 day range, we see white blood cell decreasing by about 20% in lots of the people, right? So I also think that is evident. It's not a major decrease, but enough that tells us there is a reset. And in fact, when we looked in this latest paper at what's called the lymphoid-myeloid ratio in patients, especially the over 40, we saw a rejuvenation of the immune profile. So more lymphoid cells compared to myeloid cells. And so, so that's evidence that you probably need the full 5 days to get the reset.
Valter wouldn't say it, but I will say it because I can. That the diet is put out by Prolon, Prolon. I've been on it. Our producer, Tim, has been on it. His wife has been on it. I'm a big believer in it.
Sure.
One quick question and a follow-up on that 5 day. Obviously, you're talking about different cycles. So who should, some people should do it potentially once a month. Some others might do it once every 3 months, 6 months. How do you determine that?
Well, based on need, right? So I think if you're a 28-year-old athlete that is on a very low-calorie diet, and, maybe you might only need to do it a couple times a year. If you're a diabetic, what we test at least on year 1 is 12 cycles per year. And that's being very effective, right? But the good news is that after the 12 cycles, potentially you might move to 6 cycles per year on year 2. And then maybe 4 or 5 cycles per year on year 3, right? So we're really trying to cure people versus, here's a drug that you're going to be on for the rest of your life. So that's diabetic, right? Somebody's pre-diabetic and maybe 3 or 4 times a year, maybe 5 times a year. So I think it's probably best to talk to a registered dietitian or a physician that knows what they're doing. And that's it. And follow, have it personalized, right? Obviously, this got to be personalized. And then you can adjust, right? So year 1 could be 12 times and year 2 could be 6 times.
Is there any populations that this would be harmful to, more harmful than beneficial?
Certainly somebody is anorexic or has eating disorders or, any disease. So somebody would say liver damage, somebody with kidney damage. I mean, even though it might help, right? But the problem is, can the body sustain a fasting state for so long if they have severe liver damage, let's say cirrhosis, right? So that's why we're very careful, and those should only be addressed by a team that knows what they're doing in clinical trials, right? So until we know more. But for example, we know that the fasting mimicking diet lowers fatty liver, right? And this we published on this a few years ago. So there's benefits to the liver, but if somebody's severely liver damaged, then that person will have to not do it, or certainly be part of a clinical trial testing it.
You're actually a very accomplished musician, I understand, and curious what you've got to have thought about the role of music when it comes to longevity as well. I'm just curious, have you looked into any of that?
I haven't looked at that. No, I think it's, certainly a lot of people have looked at happiness and how happiness contributes. And I would say that the probably the clear way that it's going to contribute is by making you more motivated, right? So if you're enjoying music and lots of other things in life, then you're more likely to do all the right things. And clearly, living maybe 20 years longer is about doing all the right things. And I think that I always say there's going to be 2 populations, one that does that and one that doesn't care. And that's where we're going to see 20-year probably or so difference in average lifespan, right? So music is probably one of the things that can make you more motivated to do everything else right.
I think it is a compliment and a boost for longevity, in my opinion.
Yeah, of course, I have to talk about things that are demonstrated, right? So I hope so, right? I certainly was exposed to a lot of music for many years.
Yeah.
And weren't you a blues guy?
No, rock. Yeah, no, I started with blues in Chicago. Then I studied with bebop in Chicago with a guy named Stuart Pierce. He was a great guitar player. And then, studied with some great people, Jack Peterson and then Harley in Texas at jazz, and then moved to LA to join the rock scene, right? So yeah, but the one thing that I did mean, it was like pro aging, because I lost it did a lot of damage to my ear, I know for sure, right? So
of course. Well, you probably weren't wearing earplugs or anything back then.
Yeah, it's not exactly a super healthy cohort either. You're out there doing blues and drinking and smoking and stuff. But
the one smoking, drinking were the healthy rock musicians.
Dr. Valter, I love all the work you're doing, and I just want to say thank you.
Thank you.
It was great talking to you again.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
We're going to take a quick break, and we will be back with your healthy takeout. Welcome back to Longevity Junky. Time for the healthy takeout.
So what did you think of that one?
He's really nice. He opened up a bit, which was fun. It's interesting to hear that the fasting, due to research, long term is not very good. That kind of freaks me out because everyone's on that right now.
Correct. And that's one of the things I really wanted to get out of this, because here's the thing, is that this is one of the problems with a health influencer driven world we live in right now, where you really, especially with diet becomes almost like religion for people. And in that regard, they don't listen to data. They don't listen to other people. And I think that's a real problem.
Well, and there's so much out there. There's so many, as we just see on this show, there's so many opinions about diet.
Yeah, exactly. So if you go back to our interview with Robert Lufkin, what do we have in common with that approach?
Well, the low carb, low sugar.
That's in common. That's everybody across the board says that. Okay.
Yes.
I think it's pretty safe to do that, right? Now, the protein issue that I brought up is something that I think is really, really tricky because, there are really smart people, as you know, like Peter Attia, some others who are talking about doing a gram per pound of protein per day. His studies are based not only on basic science, but clinical studies as well, and also on epidemiology. He's looking at things from 3 different perspectives. And what Valter will tell you is that he believes that high protein diets, although they may have the benefit of creating muscle mass when you're younger and maybe even middle age, that they are associated with higher risks of cancer later on. And he's shown that in his data. Okay. Now, that's not to say that that's 100% the fact, because the reality is Peter Attia is showing you data that says, well, if you have low muscle mass and you're heading into that, 60s, 70s decade, then you're more likely to die because you have less reserves.
True.
Very true. If you've got somebody on one side saying super high protein is going to be much more like you're going to get cancer and die early, and that's sort of the camp of Valter Longo, and I would say David Sinclair is in that same category. He's also a low protein guy. And then there's guys who say, pack it on. You need a gram per pound of protein per day. And
you can't have enough protein.
So the safest thing, if you're thinking about this purely from from longevity, is probably somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. And honestly, with my own, God, you've seen me. I do all these different diets, especially the past couple of years. I've been, and when you said diet is like religion, I'm like, yep. Because I'm like, I was, I'm extreme, literally. Packing things when I'm traveling and only eating that, and crazy. And I have found a balance and moderation is key.
Right now, I'm actually very high protein, and the reason I'm doing that right now is because I'm on this push to create muscle mass right now. I don't anticipate that in a couple years when I feel like I've gotten enough, a lot more of the mass that I want. I don't anticipate hitting that protein that hard anymore. And then it's the same thing with fasting that you talked about too. Remember, this is again one that probably shocked a lot of people when you heard him say that, fasting for 8 hours, doing the 8-hour windows every day or less is actually associated with cardiovascular death, earlier cardiovascular death. Probably people out there were like, what? That is crazy. Everybody out there is saying it's so good for you, right?
Right.
But then, so
and
that's
you feel good. That's the hard part. People are like, I feel good. They're like a walking billboard for it. It's conversation starter. And it's because they have all of these short-term, like he's saying, short-term benefits, but we aren't aware really of this evidence of what it's going to be in the long run for us.
Yeah, because what he's saying is that, listen, there's no doubt, and he's absolutely right about this, it's going to improve metabolic health. We talked about with Dr. Lufkin about this, improves insulin sensitivity, improves cholesterol, improves inflammation levels by doing those shorter windows, right? But what he's saying is, yes, shorter window intervention, yes, but don't do this for 30 years in a row, because the data of people who do this over a period of decades at a time might suggest that you're going to die earlier because of it. So again, we go back to this idea that, okay, well, then that's probably the safe thing to do, right?
Yeah.
It's probably the safe thing.
And I also think that doing things in cycles, which is kind of what I've ended up navigating towards now, and doing things in cycles, maybe having like a high fat diet for so long, and then having a high protein diet for so long. And in between there, maybe doing some sort of this like mimic fasting or something to kind of get your, I just keep my body guessing.
So let me talk about the Prolon diet thing, because I know
yeah, I'm not sure what that is.
The company's called Prolon. And I know Valter was very reluctant to talk about it because he has ownership in this company. But I do know that his ownership, basically, he donates his profits back into research. So, he's dedicated to the science and doesn't want any appearance of promoting a company that he has ownership in. But so I've done this once. I know Tim, our producer, and his wife have done this. But effectively what it is, it's a 5-day diet, and it comes in one package. It's not expensive. I mean, it's like, I don't know, it's under $200. But I mean, that's 5 days of
For
food.
5 days.
So, I mean, that turns out pretty good, right?
So it is food.
Oh yeah, it's food. It's food. But it's like soups and like these, little
specific ingredients that's not going to like spike your insulin or anything like that. Like it's all okay.
Yeah, it's a low protein, low carb, strict diet, and gives you all the stuff that you can eat and drink. It's all there in one package for 5 days.
Why wouldn't we just kind of do a whole fasting? Is it because these little ingredients or the little amounts that we're getting is feeding something specific in our body?
It's mostly just because fasting mimetic diet is easier for people and that more people can do it rather than just being on a pure water diet for 5 days.
The people who can do it, because I have done a 10-day complete fast of just water. Is that something that would have these benefits?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. No doubt about it. So this diet is designed to fool the body that you're doing that without actually doing it. So the benefit is particularly for people like, say if you're not in great health like you are, it might be a little bit more risky to have like no nutrition for 5 days.
True. Very true.
So I think the way he described it was really like, this is kind of a balanced approach. You're getting the benefits of the prolonged period of time of fasting while you're not actually completely fasting. Okay, so during the diet, you have some of he mentioned the word autophagy, which is basically the body eating away like old cells that are useless. We call them senescent cells or zombie cells that sit around and promote aging. So they do that. But the other thing that happens, he talked about during that period, is the stem cell, progenitor cells start to develop, and you have some of these, other cells that are involved in development. Some of those mechanisms start coming in. So it's as much about what happens during the fast as what happens after the fast, which is all of a sudden you've got these new refreshed mechanisms and tools to sort of build solid, proteins and cells, in your case, nails and hair and skin that you noticed. So that's exactly what is supposed to happen.
I love the teaching that we get on this show because of you.
Well, it's basically the people we have on that are doing it, but I appreciate that. Okay, so you want to read us out?
Longevity Junky is created by Dr. Buck Joffrey, MD, and Timothy Fonara. It is executive produced by myself, Nikki Lee, Buck Joffrey, and Timothy Fonara. The show is produced by Pretty Fast, and Phil Ferragamo is our producer, and original music by Alloy Tracks. We're distributed by our friends at Acast, and see you next time.